Hi guys, welcome to the channel Sluggers Blue for your CAT RC preparation. In today's video, we'll be continuing with the RC that we had taken up in the first part of this session. This RC was asked in the CAT exam in the year 2019 in the second slot. I've titled the RC as British Colonial Policy, 526 words, 5 questions, quite standard. And yeah, so in the first part, we've already gone through the passage for this RC. In this part, we'll be taking up the questions. Okay, those who have not watched the first part of this RC, you can do so. You can find the link of the first part in the description of the video. All right, so let's start. Okay, so starting with question number 1, the stem says, consequently, the colonial state could not settle simply for eminence at the cost of its marginality and began to take initiatives to introduce the logic of modernity into Indian society. Which of the following best captures the sense of this statement? Now, this is something that has been mentioned in the passage, I think, in the later part of the first paragraph. The sentence has been taken from here verbatim. Okay, and what the author wanted to convey here, as we have noted in the passage explainer part as well, that well, the colonial state was not okay with the idea of not having to interfere in the day-to-day affairs of the people in return for their acknowledgement of the colonial state's superiority. Okay, so let me explain to you what, let's discuss the words eminence and marginality, and let's try to understand then what exactly he's trying to say here. Okay, so eminence is basically acknowledgement by a group of by the people of the superiority of a certain power or state or center or rulers, basically the rulers, in this case the rulers, the colonial, the Britishers, right? So that's eminence, acknowledgement of superiority in this context. That's what eminence means, okay, by the people. Marginality, the idea of marginality in this context means that, well, you are the ruler, we acknowledge your superiority, but you shall not interfere in the day-to-day affairs or try to impose any external uh, any sort of external rules or regulations on the ground level. Okay, so, and in return what we'll do, we'll acknowledge your superiority. We'll acknowledge that you are the king, you are the ruler, like the kingdom is yours, etc. But you gotta stay within you gotta stay within your margins, and that's why it's marginality. Okay, so now that we know what eminence means and we know what marginality means, let's read the sentence once more. Consequently, the colonial state could not settle simply for eminence at the cost of its marginality. That means the colonial state, the Britishers, were not okay with this idea. They were not okay with the idea that okay, that they will simply be considered, they will be given their acknowledgement of superiority and eminence, and will be considered to be the rulers there, but they don't get to interfere or change anything on the ground level. They were not okay with this. Okay, that's what the sentence means, that they could not settle simply for eminence at the cost of marginality, of at the cost of getting marginalized. Okay, now let's look at the options one by The first one says the cost of the colonial state's eminence was not settled, therefore, it took the initiative of introducing modernity into Indian society. A very classic case of distortion, in fact, almost comical. So, this option seems to imply that there was somehow some sort of cost involved in the colonial state's eminence, which was supposed to be settled by, seems to be saying like the Indians, and because it was not settled, it took the initiative. The state took the initiative of introducing modernity into Indian society. Because nowhere has the author talked about any sort of cost involved in the colonial state's eminence. Neither has he talked about that it needed to be settled or something. So this is totally a foreign idea here. So you can eliminate this with a capital E. Coming to second option, the colonial enterprise was a costly one. So to justify the cost, it began to take initiatives to introduce the logic of modernity into Indian society. Another attempt at at humor, I guess, by the question setter. The colonial enterprise was a costly one. Where in nowhere in the passage the author mentioned that anything about how expensive or not so expensive or reasonably costly or reasonably priced was the colonial enterprise, and how it needed to be justified, which the Britishers did by taking initiatives to introduce the logic. The author hasn't talked about any of this, so you can eliminate this with a capital E. Option C, the colonial state's eminence was unsettled by its marginal position. Therefore, it developed Indian society by modernizing it. First of all, like what this option has done is like, see, the colonial state was considering the trade-off between eminence and not being marginalized. This option made has mixed both the ideas. It says the colonial state's eminence was unsettled by its marginal position. So it seems to imply that, okay, although the people of the region, they acknowledge the colonial states to be superior, but still that acknowledgement did not seem true to the rulers, because for some reason, because they were not allowed to interfere into the day-to-day matters. No, we cannot go that far and make such assumptions just to make this option correct, right? So, and then moreover, also look at this word here. It says it developed Indian society by modernizing it. The author has been very clear about it, that there was no development that happened as a result of the as a result of introducing modernity by the Britishers. Okay, in fact, he somewhere says there was a development of underdevelopment. So this is a we definitely have reservations against this part as well. So you can eliminate this also as with a capital E. Coming to the last option, uh, the colonial state felt marginalized from Indian society because of its own modernity. Therefore, it sought to address that marginalization by bringing its modernity to change Indian society. So, yes, that is in a way what the author has said. The author does say that the the colonial state, the BCS, the British colonial state, they started with their first strategy, which was of that which was that of being cautious in their approach while occupying the country. They occupied the country. They were cautious in their approach. They used a mix of diplomacy and military power, and they were not. And initially they were cautious and not very interfering, but they could not really sustain this because they were representatives of the great colonial discourse, right? That's what this means, that it felt marginalized from Indian society because of its own modernity, because they were representatives of the great colonial discourse arising out of the Enlightenment rationalism. They felt marginalized here. They felt that they were not able to control things on the ground level, and hence they sought to address that marginalization. They wanted to change that by bringing its modernity to change, by bringing in their own concepts, by uh, introducing the logic of modernity into the Indian society by altering them. Okay, and they were not okay with the idea of being just being eminent rulers without being getting to change things on the ground level, right? So not necessarily for the better, obviously. So yeah, so as the author has noted, most generally in the for the verse, generally for the verse. Anyhow, that's a different point. But yes, option D does seem to capture, at least among these four options, what this sentence seems to say the best. Okay, so yeah, so option D will be your correct answer. I'll just mark this just so that there is no confusion. Okay, option D is your correct answer. Let's move on to the next one. Coming to question number 2. All of the following statements, if true, could be seen as supporting the arguments in the passage, except. So, all right, so we have an except scenario, so triple TF scenario, right? So we'll just take note of that. That means three. It's an application question, first of all, right? So you have to assume the options to be true and figure out which of these do support the arguments in the passage and which is the one that does not support, right? So three of them will support the arguments. Three of the options will support the arguments in the passage, and one of them will not support, right? I'm just gonna write NS. Okay, so it doesn't have to weaken, by the way. It doesn't have to weaken. It just should not. Just being irrelevant will also be enough, given that the rest of the three do support. Okay, so your correct answer will be the one that either does not support or weakens. Okay, coming to the options. The first one says, throughout the history of colonial conquest, natives have often been experimented on by the colonizers. If this were true, will it support what the maybe an argument in the passage? Yes, there is an argument in the passage where the author says that particularly as some empirically inclined theorists of that generation considered the colonies as colonies a massive laboratory of utilitarian or other theoretical experiments. They used to think of these colonies as mass scale laboratories where you can try out your ideas in the fields of economy or in the fields of socialism. Right? So yeah, so that's something that is called for. Option A will support an idea in the passage, so we'll note this as something that will support, and hence you can eliminate this as an answer. This cannot be your answer. We need to figure out the one that does not, right? You are accept the word accept here. Option B, modernity was imposed upon India by the British and therefore led to underdevelopment. Yes, that is true. Modernity, see, if this is, we anyways know that this is true, but does this support an argument in the passage? Modernity was imposed upon India by the British. The author has said that, and therefore led to underdevelopment, and it did lead to the economic reform or the economic alteration part of it. This, as this point of reference mentions, did not foreshadow the construction of a classical capitalist economy, but rather what happened was the creation of a degenerate system of capitalism, what early dependency theorists called the development of underdevelopment. So yes, this option will also support this point, will support the point as we mentioned here in the last part of the last paragraph, right? So we can note this also as an option that does support and hence can be eliminated. Then coming to option C, the change in British colonial policy was induced by resistance to modernity in Indian society. We have to assume this to be true and then check whether it supports something from the passage or not. So what we are assuming to be true here is that the change in British colonial policy, right, was induced by resistance to modernity in Indian society. No, the author says that the change in the British colonial policy, it was first a cautious one, and then it became the one which started imposing external forces of modernity onto the Indian society, right? So this change, according to the author, was because the British themselves felt marginalized because of their own modernity, because they were representatives of the great discourse, the great colonial discourse, not because there was some sort of resistance to modernity in Indian society. Now, this is not to say that there was no resistance to modernity in the Indian society. There was resistance. So, in fact, the author has noted that once they started imposing this modernity as an external factor, there was some resistance from the Indian society, right? But see, both parts of the option
have been taken from the passage. Change in British colonial policy has happened here in the passage, right? It also talks about it here. Resistance to modernity in Indian society. In a way, yes, they were resistance to the application, external application of modernity by the British. The author has said that here in the later part. But was the first caused by the second? In fact, it was just the reverse. uh, the resistance to modernity in Indian society was caused by the change in British colonial policy. Because when they changed their colonial policy to that of externally deploying or applying, introducing modernity, that's what caused the Indians to resist modernity there, right? So in fact, this is a very peculiar case of cause and effect. The cause and effect has have been reversed here. So this will in fact weaken the argument, right? This will not strengthen the argument. So we'll note it as an option which will weaken the argument, and hence it can be the answer. So we'll note it as capital S for selection, strong selection. Coming to option D, the introduction of capitalism in India was not through the transformation of feudalism as happened in Europe. Yes, the author has mentioned this very clearly in Braces. He says that, and in any case, historians have forcefully argued that what it was to replace was not like feudalism, or with or without modificatory adjectives. So yeah, so whatever, uh, the system was, whatever the British were trying to replace, like the original form of the Indian society, that was not that of feudalism. And this option says the introduction of capitalism in India was not through the transformation of feudalism, because there was no feudalism. So it does support that. Yes, it cannot be through the transformation of feudalism, because well, there was no feudalism according to the past in India at that point of time. So yes, this will support the and this argument in the passage, and hence can be eliminated quite easily. So your correct answer, guys, will be option C. Okay, let's come to the next one. Okay, guys, so let's come to the next question. The stem says all of the following statements about British colonialism can be inferred from the first paragraph, except that you have to complete the sentence. So again, it's a except scenario. So that means after the four options, three of them can be inferred, are statements that can be inferred about the British colonialism from the first paragraph. So we have to stick to British colonialism, and we have to stick to the first paragraph and see which of the three can be inferred, and the one that cannot be inferred will be your answer. Okay, that will be your answer. So let's assess the options one by one. The first one says that the British colonialism allowed the treatment of colonies as experimental sites. So yes, the author has talked about that, so we can infer that. There's this part that says some empirically inclined theorists of that generation considered the colonies a massive laboratory of utilitarian or other theoretical experiments. So yes, that's definitely correct. Can be inferred, and hence can also be eliminated, because we want the one that it cannot be inferred. Next, faced resistance from existing structural forms of Indian modernity. Now, this is a very, what is the word? That's a very insidious, right? Insidious option. Insidious, why? Because it seems it seems something that has been very clearly, or something that is very straightforward and has been given almost verbatim in the passage. But that's not the case. What they've done is they've just changed one bit of this option, and which has rendered the whole option incorrect. See, it's true that the British faced resistance from existing structural forms of Indian society, not modernity. See, the passage says sometimes its initiatives were resisted by pre-existing structural forms, not structural forms of modernity, structural forms, just structural forms. At times, there was a more direct form of collective resistance, that's fair. But the British colonialism faced resistance from existing structural forms of the Indian society. That's enough. Nowhere does it say that the author has neither stated or hinted or implied that there was something like some sort of Indian modernity which was already there, and it was that which put up some sort of resistance in face of the Britishers trying to impose modernity from outside. No, the idea of there having been being some sort of Indian modernity is totally foreign to the passage. Nowhere has the author mentioned that in the passage. So just because of this single word distorts the whole idea here, and then renders this to be something that cannot be inferred. And because this is something that cannot be inferred, this can also be your answer. Okay, we'll still check the rest of the two options. Was at least British colonialism was at least partly an outcome of Enlightenment nationalism. Yes, the author has said that it does the great represented the great conquering discourse of the Enlightenment rationalism. So yes, we can infer this. Option I this is also correct. Can be inferred and can thus be eliminated. Option D was at least partly shaped by the project of European modernity, or at least partly shaped by the project of yes, the European modernity is basically when they restructured the whole of Europe, right? So this is the point of reference. It had restructured everything in Europe, the blah 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 blah. So that it may have been partly shaped by this. Now, this is not as inferable as your option C and option A. That's something that we'll have to accept. It is still like we are going to have at least make a little assumption here, a slight leap here in this case. Fair enough. It's not as inferable as A and C, but still, if you compare it with our current version of the answer, which is option B, this is definitely D. Delhi is more inferable than your option B, which is not inferable at all. Okay, so D is way more inferable than option B, and B cannot be inferred, and hence your correct answer here will be option B. I just marked that with different ink here. All right, so I hope that's clear. Let's move on to the next question. Coming to the next question, the stem says, which one of the following 5 word sequences best captures the flow of the arguments in the passage? See, guys, again, this is one of those questions which is basically designed to test how well you've understood and you're able to differentiate the core ideas from the peripheral ideas of the passage. Okay, so let's look at the options. The first one says colonial policy, enlightenment, external modernity, subjection, and underdevelopment. Yes, that seems to be right. The author has talked about what was the colonial policy, how it had 2 strategies, and it talks about how the second strategy was how the British colonial state was a representative of the Enlightenment, great great conquering discourse of the Enlightenment nationalism, right? So he talks about Enlightenment here. External modernity being deployed over the colonies, in this case India. He's talked about that. Subjection, the idea of accepting modernity being considered as subjection is what the author has talked about somewhere here. And then finally it closes with the underdevelopment. So yes, this can be an answer. But because this is just the first option, we're going to mark this with the smallest weak selection. We might just come across a better flow of ideas. Let's see. Military power, colonialism, military power. It was not just military power, it was a combination of military power and diplomacy. So there are some reservations here. Colonialism, the author has talked about colonialism, that's true, but like like so by the time you get to the later part of the first paragraph, he has already gone into the depth of the idea of colonialism and into the specifics. It's not just as broad as colonialism, right? In option A, it makes sense because that's where the author is introducing the idea of colonial policy and what were the 2 strategies. That makes sense. That doesn't make sense here. Restructuring, yes, they did make changes and they did restructure. So I guess that's less objectionable than the other parts. Feudalism, now feudalism does not match at all. The feudalism was not true in the case of India, as the author has already noted here, right? Like what it was supposed to replace was not like feudalism. So yeah, you don't even need to see any further. The next part is capitalism. Again, it does not match. Neither of these to match, and obviously we had some reservations with these 2 aspects. So you can eliminate this with the capital E. Coming to option C, military power, arrogance, laboratory, modernity, capitalism. Military power, arrogance. Again, this is lacking. First part is lacking. It was not just military power. It was combination of military power and diplomacy. Arrogance. Although this seems to, in terms of the idea conveyed without any connotations, it seems to be on point because like it did seem like that they were the Britishers were really intent on imposing their own values and their ideas and their notions. But if you use the word arrogance for that, then it puts a negative connotation on the idea, which is, I don't think it is called for. Okay, so we'll leave that. We'll just note this reservation that we have against this and move on. Laboratory, yes, he talks about laboratory, but not that's not the core idea. It's just a supporting point, just peripheral idea. One more reservation here: modernity. It has come too far too late. Modernity has been discussed in detail in the later part of the first paragraph, and to some extent in the first part of the second. So, but it is still relatively less objectionable than the rest of them. Okay. Capitalism again does not make sense. The author hasn't talked about it. He says that it was not a classical version of capitalism that developed. It was a degenerate version. So this is not clear about that. So you can eliminate this also very easily. Many reservations with this option. Coming to option D, colonial policy, arrogant rationality, resistance, independence, and development. Colonial policy makes sense. That's good. Arrogant rationality. Now again, this puts a negative, ring to it. So has, like this seems derogatory in nature. This seems has a negative connotation, which the author has not been very clear about. The author hasn't shown any negative, hasn't associated any opinionated negative connotations with the ideas that he's expressing. He seems to be more objective about things. So he see if you may have noted that he doesn't seem to be pro-British, or neither does he seem to be pro-Indian, right? Because in one place he has said something about, he says that this repetitive emphasis on externality should not be seen as a nationalist initiative. That means he's not tried to be pro-Indian or anything. At the same time, he's also in some cases, in some places, he has criticized the British part. So he's also not pro-British. So he seems to be pretty objective here. So no, arrogant does not make sense. Resistance on part of the Indians, yes, this was there. So this is relatively less objectionable. Independence, well, independence doesn't seem to fit so well, and moreover, development is definitely not true. It was underdevelopment, so you can eliminate this as well. So your correct answer, guys, will be option A. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Coming to question number 5. The stem of the question says, which of the following observations is a valid conclusion to draw from the author's statement that the logical structure of endogenous change does not apply here? Here, transformation agendas attack as an external force. The point of reference is here from where the lines have been taken verbatim. So, guys, before we look into the options, let's just very briefly discuss what these lines meant. The lines are, the logical structure of the endogenous change does not apply here. That means that the endogenous change is the change that happens from the inside, where no external factors are involved, which happens organically. So he says this logical structure of endogenous change does not apply in the case of how India was transformed or altered by by uh, by the Britishers, by the application of external force, or by introducing the logic of modernity from outside. Because and it's almost self-explanatory why it does not apply here. Because, well, the change was not endogenous. It was not endogenous change, right? It was not an organic change that came about, that the Indians came about themselves, right? It was something that came from outside. It was exogenous, exogenous, right? And that's what he means. Here, the transformation agendas attack as an external force. Here, the transformation agendas attack from outside, and hence the change in this case can in fact be considered as exogenous. The author hasn't used the word exogenous. It's just, I'm using it just to explain things to you better. Okay, coming to the first now. In light of this understanding, let's look at the options one by one. The first one says colonized societies cannot be changed through logic. They need to be transformed with external force. No, the discussion has been about, what the author wanted to convey was whether the logic of endogenous change can be applied to this particular change, or whether this logic of endogenous change cannot be applied to it. Because And then he basically says that it cannot be applied, this logic of endogenous change cannot be applied here because this change was not endogenous change, it was exogenous. It was brought about by external factors. It's not about whether changing societies by logic or by superstitions or something, right? So this is again definitely not true. Can be eliminated with the capital E. The transformation of Indian society, coming to the next option, the transformation of Indian society did not happen organically but was forced by colonial agendas. Yes, that's exactly what he's trying to say. Like it did not happen organically, it did not happen in an endogenous manner, and hence this logical structure of endogenous change is not applicable here because it was forced by colonial agendas. So yes, this can be an answer. I will mark this as a small s and move on. The endogenous logic of colonialism can only bring change if it attacks and transforms external forces. The endogenous logic of colonialism can only bring change if it attacks. There was no endogenous logic of colonialism. The logical structure, and there was logical structure of endogenous change and not endogenous logic of colonialism. See guys, if I take three words, endogenous, logical, structure, if I just rearrange them, that does not mean that every arrangement will have give me the same idea. Like the ideas will be substantially different. It's the permutations in which these words are used will make a difference. So just because okay, it says logical structure of endogenous, and then somehow we're just gonna just rearrange the terms here and introduce something slightly more interesting, maybe colonialism here. So it doesn't mean that it will be the same idea. The endogenous logic of colonialism, there was no, and moreover, this is almost an oxymoron. Colonialism, how can it have an endogenous logic? Colonialism, the idea of colonialism is about going and subjecting foreign lands to your own authority, colonizing them. How can that be endogenous? How can you colonize yourself, right? Yeah, like when something is wrong, there's n number of ways of figuring out what all is wrong with it. So yeah, I think we have substantial reason points to eliminate this. Let's move on to the next one. Indian society is not endogamous. Now, guys, gamous comes from gamete, uh, gamos, which is the root for marriage. The author hasn't really talked about marriage here, like whether the Indian society was endogamous. Endogamous, by the way, is the practice where you marry within your group, right? Endogamy is like within your group, not family, within the a group which is based on probably caste or creed or religion or something. That's endogamous. That's an endogamous marriage. But be that as it may, uh, the author hasn't really talked about this here. So it's clearly a case of error of inclusion. So you can eliminate this as well as capital E. Your correct answer will obviously be option B. Okay, so that's your questions. Okay, guys. So coming to the vocabulary part. Now, see the way we go about the vocabulary so far as the anthology sessions are concerned. I'm not going to read out uh, the meaning and discuss the meaning of each and every word which has been marked here, because we'll have a separate course which will be dedicated to vocabulary building, a series of separate courses, in fact. So and to keep these sessions short, what I'm going to do is just going to list, mark the words which I figured that some of you may have found challenging, and then provide the contextual meaning of those words. Yeah. Okay, so yes, that's how we're going to go about vocabulary. What you can do is you can simply pause the video here, go through the word in its context, as part of the sentence where it occurs, read that, and then read the meaning of the sentence. That's as simple as that, right? So you can do that, and I'm going to move on to the next part.
Okay, guys, coming to the analysis and readings part, the first parameter that we'll discuss is the genre. Now, the genre is basically the source, the domain of the source from where the passage has been taken. It can be psychology, economics, management, science, technology, or politics, governance, culture, social sciences, history, many of them. So, and why is it relevant? Why is it relevant to for me to tell you what genre the passage was from? Because guys, there is utility. There's some utility here because let's suppose you faced some difficulty while reading this particular passage in terms of the terminology or in terms of the ideas that were discussed here, it will definitely benefit you if you can at least read 2 to 3 to 4 articles from this particular genre. That will increase your familiarity at least to some extent. Especially if you found it really difficult, you should definitely read at least a couple of or 2 or 3 articles from the genre. Okay, if you found it easy, that's all right. But if you found it difficult, that means there is something really for you to gain there. Okay, you really need to gain some familiarity in that genre. All right, that's the first parameter. Second parameter, readability. Readability is with respect to the passage, not the RC. When I say RC, I am talking about the passage as well as the questions. When I say passage, we're just talking about the passage. Readability score, which is mentioned here, it is about this. It scores the passage. It basically tells you how easy or difficult was the passage to comprehend. And the way it can help you is if you figure that for a particular genre, uh, if you figure that generally your understanding or your scores, your accuracy goes really low whenever the readability of the passage is quite high, you can definitely benefit from exposing yourself to material that is more dense, that is more difficult to understand, that has a higher level of readability, that has higher score of readability, right? So yeah, so that's one way in which you can factor in this insight, this takeaway. Next, length of the passage. The length of the passage, as I always say, should always be seen in terms of not just words, but rather words per question. The number of words you're required to read to answer one question of the passage. For CAT, this is usually around 100 words per question. Again, if you let's suppose you find your accuracy to be going down when you encounter passages which are lengthy, in that case you might want to get more practice with respect with the lengthy passages, right, which offer less questions per word, or for which you have to read where you have to read more number of words per question. So yeah, that's passage length. Idle time, yes, idle time would be so I've also mentioned the idle time to read the passage here. This is the maximum amount of time that you should take. If it is less than this, that's good, as so far as it doesn't hamper your comprehension. And the idle time for maximum amount of time that you should take for solving the questions here, right? This is the total time for total idle time for solving the passage. uh, and again, this is with respect to the time that you'd be expected to solve this in your exam conditions on the D-Day, right? When you're practicing, it makes sense to initially when you're just starting your preparation, it makes sense to go gradually. Don't try to speed things up there, because speed always follows accuracy. It's never the other way around. Accuracy never follows speed. Speed follows accuracy. Once your accuracy goes really up, once you start getting more confident, that's when you can increase your speed. Okay. All right. Next, so what I've also done here is, with every passage, I'm going to provide you a couple of articles, and preferably by the same author, at least, or if not, at least in the same genre, right? So which will give you some familiarity in terms of, if you face difficulty, again, as I said, in this genre of reading, you can definitely go and check out these articles. The link for these articles have been provided in the provided in the description of the video, so you can check that out. Okay. Yeah, so that's about the analysis and reading part. Okay, now for those of you who might be watching one of these videos for the first time, I'll briefly explain to you the structure of these sessions of this course. Okay, so now guys, every single session caters to one RC, one reading comprehension, and is in turn split into two parts. The first part of the session is where I explain to you the passage of the RC in detail, and the second part of the session is where I take you through the questions of the RC. Okay, and yeah, so and 40 such sessions make up a course. 40 of these sessions make up a course which is titled as an anthology of RCs, which is directed towards your reading comprehension preparation for the CAT. All right, the current video that you're watching is the second part of this session, which caters to this particular RC. All right, so guys, with this we have completed the second RC of the third genre, that is politics and governance. There are 3 more RCs to go so far as this genre is concerned, and then we have 5 more such genres to go. And for those of you who have not seen the videos of the first 2 genres, you can do so by by going to the playlist page of the channel, of the Sluggers Blue channel. Okay, so yeah. Okay, guys, so with this, we have come to the conclusion of the session. Now, for those of you who have not watched the first part of this particular RC, this particular session, you can click here on this card and it will take you on this video and it will take you to the first part where you can go through the passage explainer to understand the passage in detail. And for those of you who want to watch the intro video of the course, you can click on this card here. It will take you to the intro video of the course. And for those and others again, and definitely if you like the session, do share it with the others who might find it helpful and useful, and definitely do subscribe to the channel Sluggers Blue for your CAD VRZ preparation. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.